Welcome to Reaching Minds, Thoughts for Your Life Journey. Today, we're going to be exploring fairness at work, cracking the new code of greater employee engagement, retention, and satisfaction, and how this impacts on us in our workplace culture and our leadership. My guest today is Hanna Hasl-Kelchner. Now, Hanna's story is very compelling. Growing up in an entrepreneurial household, running her first business before 30, and then spending decades bridging the worlds of business law, social psychology, and practical leadership. She has become a trusted advisor to both Fortune 500 companies and startups, and her work has been spotlighted in major media. Hanna stands out because she addresses the root cause of workplace disengagement and turnover. Why do employees leave? Her latest book, Fairness at Work, is not just praised by critics. It's topped Independent Book Awards list for its relevance of today's leader and professionals on retaining and engaging employees within their organization. Welcome, Hanna.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to get going in terms of these wonderful questions I'm going to be asking you in a minute. So what I'm really curious about is your journey around entrepreneurship and business law and social psychology. What sparked your interest in the idea of fairness at work?
Well, I've had a front row seat when I was practicing law to people who had issues. And they all, when you really boil it down, came down to fairness. They felt that somehow something happened that shouldn't have, and that they were the victims, so to speak. And they were looking for some type of redress. They wanted some kind of satisfaction out of it. And sometimes I could help and sometimes I couldn't. But it really got me thinking about, well, what matters? Why is this? I mean, the law covers a certain amount of issues, but then there's this whole other issue, things that go into the area of ethics. Like, why? This shouldn't happen. Well, maybe there isn't a law yet. There should be, but there isn't. But look at the impact it's had. People really were very upset. They were suffering. And as a result, when it came to their work, yes, they did their work. They weren't about to get themselves fired, but you could tell there was something missing, and all because of something that leadership could have been doing and should have been doing, but wasn't. So that's really what sparked it, and then I started to do more research in it, and here we are.
Mm. And one of the things that I want to sort of dig into is your book, Fairness at Work. What does that actually mean in practical terms for both employees and leaders?
Well, I come across that question a lot because I think people hear fairness and it's like, oh, that's just whatever you want it to be. I can't be the fairy godmother giving you everything that you want. People really need to look at the relationship at work as a social contract as opposed to a transaction. I think that is the fork in the road that so many leaders, executives, managers, and entrepreneurs get wrong. And I understand they have so much on their plate that they have to do that they would call it coddling employees is not something that they have time for. But if you think about it as a social relationship, as any area of your life, your friends, your family, the people that are close to you, I'm not talking about a sexual relationship. I'm just talking about a good connection. What's involved? Well, there's two things that are really non-negotiable. One is honesty. And people talk about it in terms of transparency, and that's good. But being honest, sometimes when you don't know, you don't know, and that's okay. For me to say, Nita, I don't have the answer, but let me get back to you. Let's see what I can find out. In the meantime, maybe you can check on this, and that, but working together. So the honesty is really important. And the other thing is what's called fair dealing in the contract world. I mean, you do it in all your business contracts. Social contracts has the same kind of covenants. So fair dealing is really about giving people the support that they need, and that is the physical and emotional support. Uh, And if you put that all together, you have a good relationship. You have a solid relationship that people can count on, that's dependable, and you're working together instead of working for somebody, you're working with somebody. And that's huge.
That is very huge, actually, because it makes me think about when organization espouse terms like, employees are most important human assets. Yet the reality is that they don't treat their human assets in a very kind and dignified way sometimes. And so I'm really curious, there's sort of incongruency that exist in organization because clearly from what you're saying is that the leaders or the managers are not perceiving the social relationships as you talk about as an important element of individual engagement with their people that they're managing.
Yes, and you put your finger on an important word, human asset, not just asset that's replaceable. Yes, jobs, people come and go, but not as a cog. And that human piece, Abraham Maslow back in the 1930s, uh, he shared with us his thinking about a hierarchy of human needs.
Mm, mm.
And at its most fundamental level, it's physical safety and being able to meet our physiological needs, so having adequate wages in order to put food on the table, a roof over our heads, and clothes on our back, and then beyond that is the esteem, the sense of belonging as you're going further up the hierarchy, and so if you put that together, yes, that's all about the social contract, and so, yes, treating people as human assets also means being able to address that need for belonging, understanding why, being included, and esteem. The respect, communicating in a respectful way instead of say, "Ha, Nita, yeah, I could fire you if I want." That type of thing. I mean, they'll be thinking about that all day. It's not funny to them. It's not funny.
I guess that's where the leader needs to recognize that the power imbalance that exists when we make those throwaway comments because it does throw us in a more vulnerable position because they could fire us
Yes.
and remove us. And adding to that is, one of the things I've observed recently for many organizations, they believe that improving engagement is through perks and benefits.
Mhm.
Yet, what I've noticed is disengagement and turnover or the attrition rate still remains high. Why do you believe fairness is the deeper issue in many regards?
Because it's about the connection. It's about that personal relationship with a manager. There's research, the people that do the Gallup polls, one of their senior people did some research, and they actually wrote a book called "It's the Manager." Why do people leave? 9 times out of 10, it's because of their manager, their immediate supervisor. There was another survey I saw where people would rather have a new manager than a raise. I mean, because it affects you that much on a daily basis. So who that person is, how you connect with them, whether you can trust them, how they communicate, how they treat you, is it with dignity and respect, or do they just kind of ignore you like you're invisible when you're walking past them? Do they say hello? Little things like that. I mean, there was a story. One person told me that they worked for a very large company, and he said in the beginning, when he first joined them, they knew your name, they knew your birthday, and then at some point you became a number. And then he quit his job and he opened up a bicycle shop in the state of Maine, because he just had it. It's like, I don't matter, I don't count. And I think today's younger generation, the Gen Zs in particular, they're not putting up with that. They let it be known. So I think really, old school management styles needs to change to address new school needs, but it's not that it's just new school. I think older generations appreciate that as well. They may not have had the market forces in their favor to say, "I'm out of here."
I mean, building on the Gen Z and how maybe different generations want different things from working in the workplace. What are some of the most common fairness gaps that causes employee disengagement or to leave, Anna?
My research shows that they fall into 5 categories, and are what I call the unwritten rules. Because when you start a job, nobody's more engaged than on their first day of work. And then they try to figure out, like, well, how do things really work around here? And that's where these unwritten rules pop. One is, approachability of management, "Oh, don't talk to Hannah until she's had her second cup of coffee." "Now's not a good time. I'm going to a meeting. I'm traveling. I'm out of town." "Well, where do I go for information? Who am I gonna ask?" I have a certain timeliness that needs to be addressed here. Approachability. Some people, just because of their demeanor, you're not as likely to raise a sensitive issue because you don't think they're going to listen. They're not going to really understand or hear you, appreciate whatever you're trying to get across. So, approachability is huge because if an employee doesn't feel like they can really connect with you and talk to you, then a problem is going to stay hidden until it's too big to hide. So, that's not helpful. That's just expensive. Approachability is huge. Recognition. People want to make sure that their work is properly recognized and not being taken for granted. Even the the smallest job still plays an important role in the overall picture of a company, and treating it like it's somehow insignificant doesn't make that person want to do more or do better. I mean, right? Recognition is huge, and it's one thing with salary and benefits and all that. That's really good. But it's those little things, those little day-to-day type interactions where it's like, "Nita, I really appreciate that project that you worked on. Because you did XYZ, we got it done a little bit sooner. Great work. Thank you." You feel seen, you feel appreciated. It makes a difference. And so recognition can come in a number of different ways, not the thank you note of the month, which is gone in 6 months, that type of thing. Oh, mechanical, and employees see through it because it's not genuine. It's not really honest. So, approachability, recognition, bias. Sometimes people don't appreciate the hidden biases that they have that maybe they've grown up with, that they are expressing through their language, through their body language, what they say, how they say it, that type of thing. One thing that leaders can do is learn how to do conflict management better. How to diffuse a situation before it blows up or stays hidden and then gets really, really ugly and expensive with a lawsuit. Last but not least is workplace management, workflow management. Because if people feel, again, like they're not given the proper tools, the proper information, that they're being set up to fail, well, what am I doing here? It's not fair. So those are the 5 general categories, and generally people don't find out about them until they've actually started working for the culture and they come across these things, and maybe somebody will tell them, in the break room or by the water cooler, "Hey, stop, don't do that." But more often than not, they learn through the school of hard knocks, or they see it happening to somebody else and they learn that way. So it's those unwritten rules which maybe the senior people have become accustomed to because that's the way we always do it. But for somebody new coming in, they're the ones that really help identify, "That's not working for me."
Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to visit my website, where you'll find more resources to support your personal and professional journey. Whether you're exploring leadership development, coaching, supervision, or inclusive workplaces, you can go and visit there for deeper reflections to help you to grow. You'll find everything at nitasharma.com. It's also the best place to connect with me directly and discover what's coming up. And of course, there are all the back catalogue episodes of podcasts that you can tap into and gain lots of wisdoms and reflections. Yeah, and one of the things I want to sort of circle back to, Hannah, is the bias, the micro behaviors that we often see in
Yes.
the workplace, the unintended impact that we can have. And, one of the things that I make a contribution, yet it falls on deaf ears, and yet Joe down the other side of the room makes the same contribution and it's heard. And I know that I'm not alone in this. And I'm always curious, why does that happen? Intellectually, I know, but I think, well, why does it still happen in 2026?
Well,
I can understand 20 years ago, but why now still? Why do you think that the bias continues to perpetuate itself in which I think does lead to disengagement of
oh,
employees?
absolutely. Next time, let Joe come up with it on his own. I think sometimes there's that inner circle, and Joe may be a fishing buddy or a, golfing buddy or what have you. That there's another piece of the social connection that maybe you and I are not a part of, a little fraternity. That's part of it. Maybe it's just the way Joe says it. His presentation is different. Maybe he doesn't hesitate. He says it more forcefully, and this time it is being heard. There could be lots of reasons. I don't wanna just, make Joe sound like the villain, but you're absolutely right that sometimes people are not being heard as much as they should be. And I think that's where sometimes things like, improvisation techniques can be very helpful for managers to use to say, "Oh, well, Nita said da this, and what else can we add to that?" So that it becomes a joint problem-solving issue instead of just one person presenting as and another. So, let them chime in, invite conversation, invite some debate to sharpen the solution and sharpen the issue.
And your research that you had been doing around your books, where I'm curious is what were some of the, or were there any? I'm not going to make any assumptions around gender differences. Is there, in terms of fairness at work, around men and women?
Well, I think we see some of those biases in how they play out sort of in the legal system, the harassment claims and that type of thing. There have been laws about, sexual harassment for decades, but it still happens. And I think it has more to do with power dynamics, than gender per se.
Yeah.
People do it because they can get away with it, which is why accountability is so important. That we don't just say, "Oh, well, that's just Joe, we let that go." No, Joe needs to be held accountable because at some point, if he doesn't, they will get sued for when something crosses a legal line. But there are other things that are unfair. It could be job assignments, project assignments. Who gets to deal with certain clients? Big high profile clients. Are new people being brought in? Is there inclusion and is there participation? Or is it just left to a small group, which is the in group? But someone did do some interesting research. Actually, was somebody that I had interviewed a while back, and she found that the more somebody is alike to the power structure in terms of characteristics, the more they're automatically part of the in group. And the more they're dissimilar, they're not. Now, by how much? I don't know. Are somebody going to, openly discriminate or just, do it more on the fringes where it's a little harder to challenge and take into account. So, I think some of that is, which is why it's so important for leaders to be self-aware, to ask themselves, well, how would I feel if I were in that situation?
Yeah, that'd be great actually if they were to reflect on that often, I think. And also makes me think about what you were just sharing is the importance of proximity. Often if you're talking about the in group, but it's also about proximity as well, isn't it? That
Yes.
can often lead you to be part of an in group. So if a leader is listening to our conversation and suspects, fairness might be an issue in the organization, what one practical step would you advise them to take to start addressing it?
Well, if they're concerned that maybe they've been unfair, I would recommend that they talk to someone that they trust, explain the scenario that they were concerned about, and how they behaved and so forth, and get some feedback. That would be one thing. Another would be, so many organizations have these employee engagement surveys, and they go by different names, employee satisfaction. They try to get at the same type of information. And so what I would ask is, what feedback have they gotten in the past? And how did they respond to it? What did they do with it? Discount it? Did they try to address it? I always love when that happens to me. That's like saying, "Oh, I need to lose some weight. I'll get a personal trainer and I'll let them do the exercises." No, the trainer can help me. It's like HR can assist and help,
Yes.
a leader, with certain issues, but they can't do it for you. So,
I think that's a key thing that they can't do it for you. You got to do the work yourself. It's just not about just running the business. It comes back to me what you were saying earlier on, Hannah, about social relationship, that human
exactly.
beings are your most important, and how you communicate with them and how you engage with them, and
Right.
creates a sense that people feel, well, I belong here. I count, my voice counts, and my contribution counts. And I think
Yep.
those things, from my observation, are done by very small micro behaviors that a leader does really well. But if a listener wanting to have one kind of insights to creating a fair workplace, what would you like them to remember about our conversation today?
I would love for them to remember that fairness is really a portfolio of things. It's a holistic approach to the organization. Benefits certainly play an important role, but there comes a point where somebody can make a ton of money, but if they don't have time to spend it because they're working all the time, it's like the risk reward type of thing. You really need to look at the organization as a whole. How are people communicating? Is there accountability? Is there an incentive structure for senior management to be fair? Or is the only metric being used what the profit is? Profit is important. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely. We're not doing this for nothing. But at the same time, if you can unlock all of the hidden potential that is on your payroll already, instead of having some people hold back, think about how much more innovation and productivity you're going to have.
Mm.
So to me, that is really the key to, look at the big picture. What are we doing? What could we be improving? Are we hiring the right people? Are we hiring for not just the skill set, but the mindset to be doing the right things to live up to our mission statement of dignity and respect? I mean, I don't know any organization that says, no, we're not going to respect our employees. Too bad.
Yeah.
You know, they all have these high aspirations, but too often they're falling short. And as you pointed out at the beginning, these engagement surveys show that we, are continuing to miss the mark. And if some of this is just too hard or somebody doesn't want to do it, that's fine. But then you're going to keep having lower engagement, higher turnover, or not having the turnover, but still low engagement. So six of one, half dozen of the other in terms of people job hugging and doing that type of thing and doing what they need to get by instead of really pole vaulting and taking the organization to another level.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, when they fully engaged, productivity increases and the collaboration increases. And in fact, I've
Yeah.
seen extensive amount of research that supports that. So my final kind of question that I ask all my guests is, what's the motto do you live by, Hannah?
My motto is about no nonsense, really. At times I'm probably too direct in calling things out, but I believe that our time is very valuable. Everybody's time is precious. And the sooner we get to the nut, the meat, which is why I wrote Seeking Fairness at Work, the sooner we can all do better. When we know better, we'll do better.
Lovely. I love that. When we know better, we'll do better. I love that. Thank you so much, Hannah. This has been a really insightful conversation that I've had with you, and I'm sure the listeners will find it very valuable as they listen to our podcast. So appreciate you coming on here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Nita.
Thank you. If you're interested in working with me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or www.nitasharma.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, why not consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you have access to your podcast, and leave a review.